Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find the show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And, of course, you can subscribe to the show through RSS, email blasts on YouTube, and on iTunes. Very jam-packed episode today, especially here in the first hour, so I won't drone on and on. I'll save that for the second hour when we talk with our good friend Robbie Martin. But as I said, jam-packed hour in the right now. We are joined by someone who I have admired from afar for quite some time now, and that is J.P. Sottile, who is the man behind newsvandal.com, as well as the, just super informative, email blasts, that you do, the rundown. And I think, JP, you are probably, hopefully, familiar to all my listeners, of course, because, later today, on Tuesday, you, talk with Chuck Ocelli all about the news. But JP Sottile, thank you for joining us on what is a very busy day for you.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, Pierce. I'm glad to be with you.
Excellent. JP, quickly, just for, we get new listeners all the time who may not be familiar with
Sure.
you or with your work with Chuck. So just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, where they can find your work, because you are, as I said, you're on newsvandal.com, which is your website, but also on Truthout, Anti-Media, a whole bunch of other platforms. So just give the listeners a little bit of background.
Yeah, I do a little freelance writing here and there, pops up around the internet. As a matter of fact, that Proper Not organization that was featured in Washington Post back in August that had identified all of the propaganda news sources, I guess I'm proud to say that 11 of those news sources are news sources that I have written for. So I guess I'm propaganda according to some people. But I'm a kind of a practicing historian, have been over the years, have a graduate degree in history. I've worked at a defense policy think tank for a short time in Washington, D.C., went into the media, worked at C-SPAN, the NewsHour, was the executive producer of a news magazine show at the ABC affiliate there for a while. I left the mainstream media under all kinds of interesting circumstances, but that's for another show, and went on my own documentary filmmaking and writing, and then got into news aggregation. And the News Vandal Rundown is my attempt at what I call ethical news aggregation, because a lot of news aggregation is you cut and paste other people's work, you put it on your website, you get the clicks, and you're able to make money off of the clicks you get from other people's work. What I do is I take stories as they are written. I have the exposed URL and the headline as it is published on the source's web page. And then I stack those into what I call a meta story, so that if you just read all the headlines in order, it will give you a story of the news cycle over the last 24 hours. So that if you want to go and read a story, you can read a story, but if you just read the headlines, you'll get a sense of what's going on. And if for anybody who's visited newsvandal.com or gotten the rundown, they will note that I use a variety of sources, often countervailing sources, where you will see Red State next to Slate, you will see The Nation next to National Review, because if there is a story that has 2 points of view, I will have one point of view and I will put the opposing point of view underneath it. So basically, I aggregate, you decide.
No, and as I said, it is a must read or must follow. I encourage everyone to sign up to the News Vandal Rundown. And of course, I tell everybody, Chuck's Tuesday show is, all you really need to listen to if you want to get caught up on the news. Michael Swanson in the first hour, and then you, JP, in the second hour. It is like that's how I sort of like congest what's been going on.
Well, you're very
kind. Always
kind,
look forward to.
You're very kind, but Swanson is just, he's been great. What a great addition to Chuck's show. And if you haven't listened to Michael Swanson talk about unpacking the intersection often between the war state and the economy, it's definitely worth it. But hey, you know what, Pierce? We got a lot of our own stuff to talk about because
yes.
The Donnie Jr. meeting continues to unfold. As I think, basically what I'm calling it is it's the collusion clown car. Because we didn't think there was any collusion. It seemed like collusion was this story. It was like, oh, yeah, of course the Democrats want to push collusion because it makes a lot of sense because they want to explain away why they lost an election that even Donald Trump has said they should have won, interestingly enough, and has said multiple times since he's been inaugurated. But, it started out with, 3 people, 4 people, 6 people. Now we have 8 people. The person who was identified today is a guy named Ike Kaveladze, and Ike Kaveladze is somebody who, at the end of the 90s, at the turn of the century, circa 2000, had a big write-up in the New York Times because he was a central figure in, I believe it was congressional investigations into money laundering, where you take money from illicit sources overseas, you bring it to the United States, and one of the ways you do it is you buy properties. You buy properties in like high-rise building projects, maybe in New York, maybe the kind of high-rise building projects that would be funded by Bayrock. Bayrock is a financial company, a real estate financial company that is connected to Donald Trump and a guy named Felix Sater. And then you start getting into the tangled ways in which it looks like Donald Trump over the course of the last 25 years, particularly according to a great piece by Craig Unger in the New Republic just last week on Donald Trump's money laundering machine, how his high-rise office condos and other buildings have been a source of great opportunity for Russian oligarchs and members of organized crime to take money that they've extracted from the Russian economy and bring it to the United States and buy properties to make that money legal.
Which is a practice that Russian businessmen and oligarchs have been doing in the United Kingdom for many, many years, all over London and Canada as well. Yeah. So it should come as no surprise. And I don't think it's really all that surprising to my listeners, but.
Well, and Pearson, we should also say it's a practice that is done by financial elites in the United States.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, no, right. Yeah.
This is the way it's done. I mean, this is,
yes.
Before we get into it, I think the thing that has occupied my mind a lot as this has unfolded is that I've been very, diffident. I've been nonplussed by this DNC hack. And the DNC hack part of the scandal, no small part because the problems with CrowdStrike, which is the private company that was hired by the DNC to unpack the hack, and they have refused to turn over the servers to the FBI, and it does seem a little odd and a little fishy. And I don't think anybody's ever going to be satisfied with any chain of evidence on that pointing directly to the GRU or sources in Russia for the hack. Now, Guccifer 2.0 is another issue, but in terms of really pinning it on the Russians, as you always hear, the Russians, I hate that too. The Russians. It's not the Russians. It's Putin's government. If you're going to talk, it's like the Russians are this monolithic, horde that are about to come over the top and invade us. Anyway, the thing that has really been fascinating to me, and I've spent most of my time on, is this idea of an international network of money laundering to sustain fraud. And, fraud is something that skims money off of the top of many economies around the world. There's a reason why Nigeria is rich in oil, but the vast majority of its people are impoverished. Because Nigeria is a place where the elites in Nigeria work in concert with companies like Chevron to basically extract wealth. And one of the ways the elites in Nigeria who help Chevron go in and extract that wealth, they take their cut and they put it overseas. They have to launder the money. So if there's some way to unpack the overall corruption, the cronyism that dominates not only places like Russia, but the United States, I think that is where the real juice is. That's what I'm hopeful of, is that Donald Trump came in promising to drain the swamp. I say that he is swamping the drain. And hopefully this will overflow finally, and we will begin to see the depth of the crony capitalism that grips not just the rest of the world, but the United States.
Yeah, and that's what I find so fascinating about this particular story, because, you know, the other day I was really kind of going back through all these articles and writing up notes and stuff, and it does at times seem like, you know, I hate to quote Sebastian Gorka, but a quote nothing burger, where okay, they are meeting, but nothing is actually discussed, you know, and the way that it's sort of unfolded, obviously it seems as if there's something more to this story when you have Don Jr. saying, you know, there's nothing to this meeting. Oh, well, we're going to release the emails. Oh, okay, well, I'll release my emails, you know, even quicker. And it will, yes, she said she might have had some dirt, but it was really, you know, we really just talked about adoption. And then it becomes this whole issue of, well, is, you know, well, this is just politics, right? You know, again,
right.
This is like the opposite of draining the swamp. This is just politics. You know, everybody does this. Everyone is, you know, contacted by, shadowy figures connected to foreign governments who claim to have dirt. And I think that is true. You know, I mean, at the same time, what was the Clinton campaign doing, hiring some shady MI6 agent to come up with some dossier that Donald Trump likes to be peed on? You know,
right.
obviously,
although that started not with Hillary Clinton, that started with Jeb Bush's campaign.
Oh yes, well, exactly, the same thing. You know what I mean?
But it's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you an example and why this shouldn't necessarily come as a surprise. And as you say, this is actually something that's done. But the scandal that this really reminds me of is the Loral space scandal. It was, I guess you could call it Satellite Gate. And luckily for you, you're probably maybe a touch too young to remember this. But back in 96, 97, China was having a problem with its missile technology, its ICBMs. They got like a satellite waiver out of the Clinton administration at that time, because the Clinton administration was deeply ensconced with Walmart. Hillary Clinton had been on the board of Walmart before Bill Clinton became president, and Walmart was seeking overseas labor. They were having a problem with child slavery, sort of labor conditions in Central America. They were looking for a new place to build products, to sew clothes and make plastic stuff to sell Americans. They wanted to get into China. China needed MFN, most favored nation status, renewed on a yearly basis. And Bill Clinton, although he campaigned against that when he first ran for president, as soon as he became president, he embraced most favored nation status. And as a matter of fact, he's the guy who ushered them into permanent MFN and WTO membership by the time he was done with his presidency. Well, in the middle of that, you have Loral Space, and there's a guy named Bernard Schwartz, who was CEO of Loral Space and Communications. He was a Clinton donor and friend, and he gets over there and does what? Many people believe Loral Space is the reason why they suddenly were able to fix their gyroscope problems and build ICBMs that could then hit the United States. That turned into a huge crisis. Oh my gosh, the Chinese are coming, the Chinese are coming. Guess what we have to do? We have to take the seemingly defunct at that time, Star Wars Strategic Defense Initiative anti-missile program under Reagan that had turned out to be a giant boondoggle, and Bill Clinton gave it many billions more. Why? Because now that China can hit us with missiles, now we've got to build a defense against it. And guess who's going to benefit from that? The defense companies, of which Bernard Schwartz was a leader at Loral Space and Communications. Then that also led to something called, it was like sort of a China funding gate, where you had Johnny Chung, this fundraiser, and then you had the Buddhist temple and Al Gore. And so here we are with a foreign country, accused of being involved in meddling with the United States electoral process on some level. Money is changing hands. Favors are changing hands. People are making money off of it. This is nothing new. The only thing that's new is that then, because we're in this weird right-left paradigm, if the left hand is doing it, well, then it's bad if you're on the right hand. But if the right hand is doing it, if you're on the left hand, then the right hand is bad. And so, unfortunately, this two-party circle jerk that we're in keeps having this kind of same paradigm pop up, and each side takes turns blaming the other.
No, and that's what as just sort of an event that you could analyze on a political level. That's what I find so interesting about this Don Jr. scandal, is that it starts with nothing happened. Then it's, well, they talked about adoption.
Right.
Well, okay, she might have had dirt, but she didn't give me anything. Then it turned, then I love the sort of right-wing Cernovich type Alex Jones theory. Oh, no, but Veselnitskaya, who's this lawyer, well, she's really some sort of deep state George Soros agent. Because, based on a picture of her behind Michael McFaul, okay, yes, which they never even researched beyond that picture exists. They didn't see that she was actually there testifying against, everything that Michael McFaul believed in, because she's, very opposed. She's basically like a lobbyist for repealing, the Magnitsky? Yeah,
Magnitsky
bill, which, of course Michael McFaul just loves. But, and I love that. So now she's some deep state agent, but they kind of turn that all around to, well, it doesn't matter because everybody does this anyway. They kind of want it both ways.
Yeah, and that's the problem. And I didn't mean to bring up the China stuff with the Clintons in the 90s, or Bill Clinton in the 90s, to say that everybody does this, so what do you expect? I think the thing is that until that, well, if my team is doing it, it's okay. If their team is doing it, it's bad. Until that thing is broken, until that back and forth ends, it will continue. And that's why I think there's an opportunity here. Now, as far as Veselnitskaya goes, there is this other connective tissue that she was involved in the Previzon case, and Previzon was a company that was accused of laundering, I think it was about $230 million that was absconded from Russia and cycled through properties and to be laundered here in the United States and also in Canada. Previzon was involved in Canada, and there was a case coming up. And this was U.S. attorney for New York was involved in the case. Well, Preet Bharara, who was the U.S. attorney in that district, was first asked by Donald Trump to stay on, and then all of a sudden he was fired. And people thought, well, this is odd. I thought he wanted him to stay on. Usually you fire attorneys because you want to put your appointees in there, but for some reason he was initially asked to stay, and then he was fired. Well, after he was fired, this case that was going to come to trial in 2 days was summarily dropped, settled out of court with, as a part of the settlement, no admission of guilt, and 2, no further legal actions could ever be taken against Previzon. And this was a big victory for Veselnitskaya and the people she worked for. Well, that's kind of odd, right? So, as far as like the Cernoviches and the Alex Joneses of the world, I've been in journalism a long time, and, right now you have Ann Coulter with her Delta dust up right now.
Yeah.
Here's the thing about that is I don't have the same number of followers. I certainly don't make the kind of money these people make. And it's because I'm not willing to turn myself into the living embodiment of clickbait. And on some level, I look at people like Jones and Cernovich and Coulter who do these things, is that they kind of know they're dealing in junk. They know they're dealing in junk, but they're doing it because they're rewarded. And unfortunately, that kind of celebrity approach, that bottom line approach to everything, is in many ways a reflection of the president, because that's what Donald Trump is. He is a bottom line only guy, and the ends always justify the means, as far as I can tell, with Donald Trump. And I think the same goes for people like Cernovich and Jones.
Oh yeah, I don't really think Cernovich believes anything he says at all.
Right.
And just evidenced by his continued support of Alan Dershowitz and his sort of shady connections to Dershowitz and the Jeffrey Epstein connected case. We don't have to get in there right now, but Going back to this sort of this meeting, this infamous meeting where there's at least eight people, maybe more, because it seems like every day. By the way, there was another, former Soviet military counterintelligence. He was one guy that was new. Then there was a translator or interpreter that was there.
Now there might be two. There might be two translators, and the former intelligence guy, that's Renat Akhmetshin. That's So now that you're right. First of all, why are there two interpreters? But yes, the clown car is pretty big at this point, and it could be more. I can't confirm anything, but I've heard some suspicions around that there may be more. Maybe I can't confirm it.
Well, and this is sort of here's my question for you, JP, without kind of diving into all of the specifics of this, because I'll link up to some articles that people can explore this themselves. But is it possible, given just some of the people involved, the money laundering aspect, that you have lawyers involved in this, that you've got the guy who sets up this meeting is the son of a son of a man who's known as the Russian Donald Trump for all of his real estate dealings in Moscow. You've got Veselnitskaya working for, I believe it's for him and others. Is the story here really much more just about, as you say, the sort of crony capitalism, about corruption, shady, money changing hands, and really not about dirt on Hillary Clinton or Russian adoptions, or, is this, I almost hate saying it, but much more a benign meeting of corrupt people talking probably about money and payoffs down the line? And that's really the scandal, and almost that the Hillary Clinton dirt is almost like a smokescreen, because if Veselnitskaya really wanted a meeting on Russian adoption, I know that according to Donald Trump at this moment, that was never a campaign thing that he was concerned with, but it definitely was earlier on.
Well, and getting rid of the Magnitsky Act has been a primary concern for Vladimir Putin and some of the Russian oligarchs around him who were affected by it. So, one of the theories that I've had over time is that what you have here is, look, what we hear is Vladimir Putin and the Russians want to undermine American democracy. They want to undermine the nature of our democratic system. And I'm like, yeah, really? Really? What if it's something simpler? What if it's just money? What if it's the Magnitsky Act? What if, here's a thing. You probably have listeners who are a little bit interested in things like the Kennedy assassination and Iran-Contra. That's something that I spent a lot of time on, whatever. One of the things you see is when you have a criminal enterprise, one of the ways to ensure the health and welfare of the people involved in the criminal enterprise is to gain control of the governmental or the legal agencies that are involved in prosecuting the criminal enterprise you're engaged in. So it just stands to reason that if Donald Trump, for example, has Trump Soho and it's all mobbed up with Russian money and it's failing and it's coming under increased scrutiny by Erik Schneiderman, the state attorney general for New York, if the Magnitsky Act is keeping Russian oligarchs and OC from getting their money in the United States to launder it, if you have Prevazon, who has this case that they're trying to deal with, it just stands to reason that one of the ways that you deal with it is to get control of the U.S. Justice Department. So what if the whole motivation of the Trump campaign is really a money motivation, and if there's any motivation on the part of any Russian officials or Russian oligarchs or people like this guy Agalarov, who, by the way, I believe was born in Baku, Azerbaijan, and the Trumps have an infamous project that they've fronted in Baku that had Russian OC money in it and Iranian Revolutionary Guard money in it. And it's a hotel out in the middle of nowhere that is supposedly everybody says what they say is it looks a lot like a woman's genitals. I guess I could say that on the radio. That's how it's derided. So what if it's just about people trying to protect their financial interests and their business interests? And of those people, Donald Trump would be one of them because how many bankruptcies? I think it was like 4 or 5. And by the time the turn of the century came, he could not get money from banks in the United States to fund his projects. He was considered too high risk. He had to get money in other places. And so if he has exposure and the guy who has a lot of exposure, Jared Kushner, I think Kushner is the guy who has the most to gain financially from the Trump administration thus far. At least he and his sister have tried to get some gain out of it. What if these people are just doing it to protect, like I was saying, their financial interests and their criminal enterprises? That actually makes a lot more sense than some incredible plan concocted inside the deep inside the bowels of the Kremlin to undermine American democracy. I'm not buying it.
No, I think it's also too when you come to a much more simple, straightforward reason. This is really money and very corrupt individuals who have no qualms about who they deal with. Right. That it's almost it's not as fun. Especially for the conspiracy theorists who want to think, oh well, this was a George Soros planted this woman there, even though there were 8 other people in the meeting. And at the same time, the CNN conspiracy theorists that want to believe that everything is some machination of the Kremlin and, Putin and the FSB and everything is this big conspiracy and it's all going to come out soon. Don't worry. We're going to impeach him and blah, blah, blah. That is so much more comforting than, if anything, we can thank the Trump administration for is a much clearer window into just how corrupt the American government system is. Because, as you say, there is nothing new to this. Look back to Bill Clinton and his dealings with the Chinese, who, on the face of it, Bill Clinton was like all other politicians that the Chinese are evil. We must defeat the Chinese, and then secretly he was, doing deals with the Chinese and blah blah blah. But this is really how it works. It's just that the Trump administration, if you can even call it that, is just very sloppy. Yes. Donald Trump Jr. should never have been allowed, free range to take meetings with people because he's a fucking idiot. He can't keep his story straight for more than 20 minutes. It's just pathetic.
Yeah, somebody titled "The Conspiracy of Dunces." No, there is this is one of the oddities of the Trumps, is the ham-handed and amateurish way in which they've handled this whole thing. And I think that's one of, let's go back to Iran-Contra. The way that scandal was managed by the people inside. Now, to be fair, one of the people inside helping to manage that scandal was George Herbert Walker Bush. I think that George Herbert Walker Bush was probably the single most successful CIA agent in the history of the CIA. Now, the official story is that George Herbert Walker Bush was never in the CIA, didn't do it, wasn't there. Well, come on, they named the headquarters of the CIA after him for a reason. If you're in New York, right? Yeah. So Yankee Stadium is the house that Ruth built. It's not the house that Mickey Rivers built. And you'd have to be a Yankees fan to know the Mickey Rivers reference. But so, they named it after him for a reason, and he was in there managing that Iran-Contra scandal, and what they were able to do was build a firewall around the Gipper. Reagan did not go down. They also had a fall guy in place who was a kind of a gung-ho Boy Scout in Oliver North who was willing to take the fall. They had their stories basically straight. Everybody was on point. They didn't have people freelancing. Everybody didn't have a lawyer, and then that lawyer had a lawyer because their lawyers are saying things that need to be protected by another lawyer. They didn't have any of that. This scandal is the complete opposite. I can't see anybody who's going to be willing to take a bullet for Donald Trump to protect him. I don't see any coordination of story. The drip, drip, drip everybody's talking about, but I think the thing that you pointed out is one of the most interesting is that the story evolved. I think there were 5 iterations by the time we got to the end of yesterday when Sean Spicer brought it all the way back around to the adoption story, which was the first story, but got ditched all last week and then was resurrected again. So they don't know how to handle the scandal. They don't have a coordinated story. They don't have really viable talking points, except for those that are pushed out, as you pointed out, by Alex Jones and Cernovich and other true believers. And in some way, it's the true believers. I don't want to say I feel badly for them, but I do understand part of the motivation for rejecting Hillary Clinton and maybe at least in some way, shape, or form embracing Donald Trump because he did, one, rail against the Bushes and the Iraq War, and a lot of people said hooray for that. He did say he was going to have a policy of non-interventionism. We've seen where that's gone. That's got flushed down the toilet. He did say that he was going to be America first, and he did seem to have a desire to supposedly drain the swamp. The problem is he's done the opposite of all of those things, and he actually embodies the swamp. And if you go back and listen, remember he said, I paid people on both sides. I've paid politicians. I know this. I know all these politicians. I paid them off. And people said, okay, well, maybe that means he's going to be above it. No, it's not that he's above it. He's a creature of it. He was born of the swamp. He's not the person that's going to drain it. He's the person who thrives in it.
Mm. No, absolutely. And I know what you mean that sort of that, like you almost feel bad or you can understand why Mike Cernovich is literally just parroting whatever Trump faxes him that morning. This is what you got to say on Twitter and just keep hammering it. Cause it is, he's betrayed people faster than any other president I can think of in recent memory, at least as long as I've been alive.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, who's going to take a bullet for a guy who ditches people, puts a shiv in their back at the first opportunity?
Oh, I know. I can't wait for this fat bastard Rob Goldstone to because that guy is not going to put his neck out for anybody. Right. And he just seems, if the stories are, this entertainment publicist who is the first person to have reached out to Donald Trump Jr. saying that he had a Russian lawyer who worked for the central government. She was supposed to be a chief prosecutor that had dirt on Hillary Clinton. Look up Rob Goldstone if you haven't seen him. He's truly just, of course he's connected to the Trumps. He's this showbiz asshole, idiot.
Yeah, classic. Classic,
yeah,
right?
Just untalented, unattractive, just horrible, goofy idiot. And he's supposedly now he's like incognito, but very, he's telling everybody where he is on Instagram, but he keeps moving around so that he won't be assassinated or something like, who's going to assassinate you? You already,
yeah, but see, look, one of the challenges we face in this story is Vladimir Putin. And, I watched the Oliver Stone, I think I watched 3 of the 4 hours. And I get where Oliver Stone, what he was doing. He did not challenge Vladimir Putin on anything. He was basically there to give Vladimir Putin an opportunity just to give his own point of view, unfiltered, right, to talk. Which, given how Vladimir Putin is portrayed in the United States media environment, is understandable. Then again, if you know anything, if you follow anything inside Russia and you go to try to find particularly some European and Russian sources, but if you can find some Russian sources, you realize that, Russia is not, it's tough to be a homosexual in Russia. It's tough to be, a dissident in Russia. It's tough to be a critic of the regime in Russia. There are issues in Russia, and then you have the rise, the resurrection of the Russian Orthodox Church and some very sort of shady, unsavory right-wing ideologies that are attached to the Russian Orthodox Church now. So there are issues there, and then it's a kleptocracy, and a lot of people who like an Alex Jones, for example, who are criticizing this anti-Russian fever right now, and it is an anti-Russian fever. It has become a fever. But these are a lot of people who would have been criticizing Vladimir Putin and the FSB for organizing the Moscow apartment bombings in 19—
Yeah, I know, right?
As a pretext for the war on Chechnya. And oh, by the way, that stuff is pretty much nailed down. I mean, there's an amazing New York Review of Books article from a few years ago. I'll send it to you if you want to post it.
Yeah.
It details what other people have investigated into it. And look, that was a false flag attack. It's almost like a kind of a classically bungled false flag attack. So because one of the reasons why we know about things is because a lot of these things do end up being bungled on some level. But what wasn't bungled were the two wars in Chechnya, which were brutal. And that's how Vladimir Putin consolidated his power. So, but does any of this justify Cold War 2.0? Because Cold War 2.0 is great for Lockheed, and Lockheed just reported like a 4.8% increase in its profit. Its stock price is through the roof. Why? Because it's selling missile defense all over the place, and this Cold War 2.0 and this standoff with North Korea. This is great for defense contractors. You can be against that and also think that Vladimir Putin is a kleptocrat and an autocrat. You can think those two things at the same time. It's possible. You can think it's bad to be just reflexively demonizing Russia in this Russia fever, and also think that Vladimir Putin's not a great guy. So, we have to be a little bit more – it's a little bit more complicated than we are used to in the American media environment, where everything is a red or blue state, black or white, good or bad, good or evil, us and them. All of these simplistic divisions, which have been very effective for perpetuating what Michael Swanson would call the war state.
No, I mean, yeah, you don't need – you can oppose NATO without licking Putin's boots.
That's right.
And at the same time too, don't forget you can not every single thing that Putin says is some sort of a threat. And, is some, he is a smart person. He does say intelligent things from time to time. So you don't go to any extreme.
Right. And by the way, it would be totally rational for him to not want Hillary Clinton to be the next president of the United States.
Oh yeah, exactly. No, totally.
There's nothing more rational than that, because I actually wrote a piece about this when right after it happened, after Ukraine flipped. When Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt were organizing, or at least managing on some level, the overthrow of the government there. And I wrote a piece on how U.S. agriculture companies, Big Ag, they were all over Ukraine. Why? Because Ukraine, during the time of the Soviet Union, was called the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. It was like the California of the Soviet Union in terms of providing like a quarter of all of the food that the Soviet Union needed. It has this incredible rich loamy soil that's famous for its productive capabilities, and U.S. agribusiness has been salivating over it ever since the fall of the Soviet Union. And guess who's connected through the Freedom House to people like Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt? Big Ag, Monsanto and ConAgra. And so, there are these larger forces at play, in places like Ukraine that Vladimir Putin is trying to forestall. And that stuff makes a lot of rational sense. The other stuff, the Russia mania that CNN pushes, undermining democracy, doesn't. And sadly what it does is it undermines the kind of critical thinking that could actually connect the dots and follow the money to the real rational reasons why these things are happening.
No, I know. And again, this is always sort of miss in the conversation. JP, we're coming up towards the end of the first hour, and you've mentioned a couple of times the military-industrial complex, things like Lockheed Martin, and again these larger things at play that might be sort of working behind the scenes. And of course, we have this really horrifying proposal by none other than Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon to essentially privatize the entire war in Afghanistan. And they brought this to Defense Secretary Mattis, who I believe it, by all accounts, sort of politely nodded his head but said, no, I don't know. But, I don't think we should write this off as not happening. And of course, the two leading people connected very closely to the Trump administration, which were going to directly benefit from this, are Erik Prince of Blackwater and a more mysterious figure, Steven Feinberg, who runs Cerberus Capital, which owns DynCorp, which is the largest mercenary firm in the world. Tell us a little bit about this, because this is, again, one of these, as I said, frightening proposals or frightening ideas, but does seem plausible.
Well, and I noted today, because I knew you wanted to talk about this, I poked around and I saw that Richard Cohen, I don't know how you would term him. He certainly kind of went full neocon during the Iraq War. When I was living in D.C., I read him because he was a tastemaker. He's a columnist for the Post, and he had a column today saying, hey, why not? Everything else has failed. We've spent $833 billion and lost over 2,300 U.S. troops there. Why not turn it over to mercenaries? They might be these European mercenaries that Erik Prince and Feinberg were promoting. It would be sort of a combination of people hired from around the world. There are a few things. One, let's just be honest. In a way, the U.S. military is a mercenary force. It's certainly it's been used as such by military planners, particularly with the coming of the war on Iraq. There was a lot of profiteering there, and that's where Erik Prince got his juice with Blackwater. Feinberg is an interesting guy, and DynCorp is an interesting guy because he just bought that, I think, in 2010. Cerberus took over DynCorp. DynCorp was Blackwater before Blackwater. DynCorp was heavily involved in these kinds of mercenary policing actions, post-invasion policing actions in the Balkans. After the Serbian war. And actually DynCorp got in trouble for being involved in drug trafficking and sex trafficking. There were a couple court cases in Britain on that at the turn of the century. It was something I was following when I was at the Center for Defense Information. So this new proposal is to try and just fully privatize the war in Afghanistan, because what's going on? Nothing's happening. It's not working. Why not just turn it over to these mercs so that companies like DynCorp can make some money off of it, and the United States can then, for example, the Trump administration, this is probably what's behind Bannon and Kushner, can say, see, we're pulling out. We're pulling out of Afghanistan. See, we are doing this America First thing. And then you quietly privatize it, and then basically what you do is you create a layer between the media and media coverage of Afghanistan and public awareness of what's going on in Afghanistan and what's actually going on there. Because as soon as U.S. troops come out, the media, which is already decidedly indifferent to America's wars around the world, would even be even more indifferent. I think that's what's behind Bannon and Kushner. But also what's behind Bannon and Kushner is what's behind almost everything in the Trump administration, because I'm sure your listeners know, but a lot of people don't connect the dots. Erik Prince is Betsy DeVos's brother. Mm-hmm. And Erik Prince was one of the guys who was reportedly opening up early back channels between the incoming Trump administration and Russia through the Gulf states. He was operating in, I think it was in Doha at the time, trying to open up a back channel because he's a big mover and shaker, right? Mm-hmm. Well, and who's Betsy DeVos? What does she want to do? She wants to privatize schools, and who's connected to her? A bunch of people would profit off of the privatization of schools, just like the guy who's in charge of Health and Human Services. Tom Price, Dr. Tom Price, formerly of Congress. Well, he's one of the guys who's taking HHS and trying to find ways to help to hasten the death of the Affordable Care Act. Well, Dr. Tom Price, in the replacement plan that he helped to co-author at the House level, had this gift to makers of medical device companies. Well, Dr. Tom Price, when he was in Congress, was somebody who was benefiting off of his own stock trades on medical device companies each time he would put a rider into a bill to give them breaks. So there is a level of crony capitalism in this administration which is unprecedented because it's everywhere, and I think Erik Prince is a representative of that kind of crony capitalism. In this instance, trying to privatize the military forces that would be involved in training and sort of special operations type actions with the Afghan army that the United States has been supporting and training over all these years and funding. And, you know, his connection to Betsy DeVos, she wants to do it in education. Tom Price, he wants to do it in healthcare. All of these, you know, Zinke and at Interior, and he wants to do it with public lands. I mean, it's every part of the administration, which is an endless search for opportunities to profit off of control of the executive branch.
No, absolutely. You're saying absolutely. But
I know. What are you going to do? I mean,
no, I know. And I mean, just to give you a flavor for, you know, Erik Prince's vision of the world. This is a quote that he gave, from a Breitbart radio interview he did, speaking about his wonderful plan. He said, quote, "I say go back to the model that worked for a couple hundred years in the region by the East India Company, which used professional Western soldiers who were contracted and lived with, trained with, and when necessary, fought with their local counterparts." So this psycho wants to, I mean, that's what's so wild about this is how blatant they are. Just go back to the, you know, East India colonialism, where we, again, hire mercenaries. And keep in mind, too, most of the people that are hired, now I know they'll say, oh, well, you know, Erik Prince hires from, you know, the best of the special forces. That's BS. Most of these mercenaries are not American. They're now, of course there are, and they do hire from that, but there's a much larger pool of mercenaries from places like Fiji, Angola, you know, all over Central Asia, all over the Middle East. I mean, these are the people that mercenaries are hiring, people that actually have, you know, experience doing this. You know, not these wonderful, brave soldiers. And I mean, and Feinberg is even more insane in that he doesn't, not only does he want to just sort of privatize the actual fighting, but I mean, of course, what he wants to do with DynCorp is have them not only providing the mercenaries and the training, but also they'll build the roads. Right. They'll work directly with the central government. They'll do, you know, aviation work. They'll do everything down to providing the guns, like the Army sniper rifles that are made by Remington, which Cerberus owns. So, I mean, his vision is even more horrifying.
Well, but isn't it really just the logical conclusion of this neo-colonial model that the United States has been purveying ever since the end of World War II? I mean, really, the Cold War itself was a wonderful excuse for the United States to slowly expand and create proxies around the world, whether it was to get bananas out of Central America, or whether it was to get cocaine out of some place, you know, maybe, you know, or get heroin out of the Golden Triangle. I mean, wherever there were resources, you know, it always blows my mind that Central Command is in the Middle East, right? It's not, CENTCOM is not North America. We have NORTHCOM for North America. Central Command is in the Middle East. Why? Because it's central to everything the Pentagon does. And why is that? Because, look, if it wasn't for the United States Navy, what would oil prices have been over the last 50 years if the U.S. Navy wasn't there to protect the vital shipping lanes that have shipped oil to the United States and around the world on behalf of oil companies. The defense budget is in many ways one of the largest subsidies to private industry ever. And I'm not talking about the defense industry. I'm talking about the oil industry. So this model of using U.S. forces, using mercenary and then replacing them with mercenary forces is the logical conclusion, because U.S. forces, it's an all volunteer force. We're paying soldiers basically to go to places like the Middle East to protect basically corporate interests, because in a lot of ways, whenever you hear national interests, does the United States really have a national interest anymore in Afghanistan?
Yeah. Well,
what is the national interest in Afghanistan anyway? No, there are other interests at play there, and it is those interests that get protected. What are the U.S. national interests in Australia? What are the U.S. national interests in the Philippines? How about in the Horn of Africa? I mentioned Australia because now the United States finally, for the first time, has Marines based in Perth, permanent base there. Why? Military projection power. Why? For the South China Sea. Why? Because the South China Sea has oil. So, when you think about it, the full privatization model in a way is the logical conclusion of everything that's happened. And to bring it back full circle, I think that in many ways Donald Trump is the logical conclusion of a political system, and it's usually, and I would actually call it the two-party system, because I think the Constitution, the actual functioning, the mechanism of government and the political system is different than the two-party system that has attached itself like a lamprey on the side of the Constitution and sucks it dry for its own purposes. I think Donald Trump is the logical conclusion of this system that we've been experiencing for the last 50 years. I mean, in some ways, I think we finally do have a truly representative democracy, because he represents what we've become and how this model has metastasized into things like Erik Prince and Stephen Feinberg wanting to basically fully privatize American empire around the world.
Oh, and don't anyone out there, and I doubt they would be listening, but anyone out there that thinks or is believing the ever pleasant Sebastian Gorka that this isn't going to cost any money is just living a lie, because these companies are not just going to go there out of the goodness of their heart. Now, Stephen Feinberg's idea is that they'll put up the capital to support these groups and firms and whatnot, but they're still going to be dependent on government contracts. Who's paying for those government contracts? Sure. Taxpayers.
Yeah, but what this is? This is actually something that's been going on since the final defense policy analysis that came out of the Herbert Walker Bush administration in 91-92 under Cheney. That turned into something called, it was piggybacked on something called the Revolution in Military Affairs, RMA. And throughout the 90s, when the defense budget was cut, there was a thing called the Cold War dividend, the peace dividend for the end of the Cold War. But what happened over the course of the 90s and leading into the Iraq War was that functions that the Pentagon used to pay for, used to hire people to do, they started to outsource them to contractors. So, for example, now I think like 80% of all intelligence contractors are run by 5 corporations, which is why you have so many of these intelligence contractors, right? Well, the same thing has happened in the Pentagon, which is why you had Halliburton providing food and water in Iraq. It used to be that you had soldiers doing the food service, and the Pentagon acquired the food, and their soldiers cooked the food and served it to other soldiers. Now you outsource all those other things, so you get down to the core, and the core was just the soldier fighting. Well, why not just follow it to its logical conclusion, replace the soldier fighting? That way, there's no middleman at the government level, right, bureaucracy that siphons some of that profit margin off. It's just a straight profit margin. It's a straight transfer of wealth from the taxpayer's treasury into a corporation bank account.
And there we are at the break. JP Sottile, thank you for joining us. Tell everybody where they can go to read more of your work.
Just go to newsvandal.com. It's all there, and be sure to sign up for the rundown. It was great to be with you, Pierce. Hope to be with you again.
Thank you so much.
I like very much radio. You're an American institution. American Freedom Radio.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me. American Freedom Radio, Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys, because they have all the technology, they have all these great things that they're going to do, but obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
Quality, value, style, service, selection, convenience, economy, savings, performance, experience, hospitality, low rates, friendly service, name brands, easy terms, affordable prices, money-back guarantee, free installation. Free admission, free appraisal, free alterations, free delivery, free estimates, free home trial, and free parking. No cash, no problem, no kidding. No fuss, no muss, no risk, no obligation, no red tape, no down payment, no entry fee, no hidden charges, no purchase necessary, no one will call on you, no payments or interest till September. But limited time only, though, so act now, order today, send no money, offer good while supplies last, 2 to a customer, each item sold separately, batteries not included, mileage may vary, all sales are final, allow 6 weeks for delivery, some items not available, some assembly required, some restrictions may apply. So come on in. Come on in. Come on in. There you. So come on in for a free demonstration and a free consultation with our friendly professional staff. Our experienced and knowledgeable sales representatives will help you make a selection that's just right for you and just right for your budget. And say, don't forget to pick up your free gift, a classic, deluxe, custom, designer, luxury, prestige, high quality, premium, select, gourmet pocket pencil sharpener. Yours for the asking, no purchase necessary. It's our way of saying thank you. And if you act now, we'll include an extra added free complimentary bonus gift, a classic, deluxe, custom, designer, luxury, prestige, high quality, premium, select, gourmet, combination key ring, magnifying glass, and garden hose in a genuine imitation leather style carrying case with authentic vinyl trim. Yours for the asking, no purchase necessary. It's our way of saying thank you. Actually, it's our way of saying bend over just a little bit farther.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, We are American Freedom Radio, Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are just joining us right now in the second hour, we are joined by a good friend of the show and a frequent guest, Robbie Martin, of course, Media Roots Radio, of the director behind Very Heavy Agenda, which we will be talking about in this hour. In the first hour, we were joined by JP Sottile of newsvandal.com. And just a quick mention right now, I would like to thank Nicole for a very generous donation on PayPal. Thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you so much for being a regular donator. Nicole is one of the people out there who from time to time gives me a little bit of cash on PayPal. Always with a very nice note. So thank you, Nicole. Again, if you want to support my work, you can always do it through PayPal, or you can become a subscriber on patreon.com. And also, please, if you did not see my recent post on the website, we are in need of some support here at American Freedom Radio. So if you appreciate the show that I do, if you appreciate having excellent guests such as JP Sottile and Robbie Martin, then please go over, you can go onto my website and just check out the latest post, and I'll link up to it in the show notes, different ways to support American Freedom Radio, because we are in need of support to keep us on the air. So please do that if you can. But as I said, we are joined by good friend Robbie Martin. Robbie, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me, Pierce.
Excellent. Sorry, I'm just taking a sip of water there. I was telling Robbie when we were off air, I'm battling a summer cold right now. So if my voice sounded a little bit weird, or if you heard me coughing in the first hour, that was why. In the first hour, JP and I were talking about the latest scandal involving Donald Trump Jr. and the Russians. They seem to be kind of going down the line of the Trump family and their connections to shady Russian characters and whatnot. And then we sort of we ended a bit talking about the privatization of war. This is being a plan that was put forward by Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon. And we were sort of talking about this is sort of like a natural progression of, I guess, the American system, and also how, Donald Trump is sort of the living embodiment of, this sort of a thing, privatizing everything from healthcare to education to war to how we conduct wars to how we feed soldiers and whatnot. But there were some things that I did kind of want to get your take on, specifically with the Russian stuff and the sort of scandal. But in the first hour, JP and I were sort of talking about that perhaps this is indicative of the sort of shady, corrupt stuff that just sort of happens with all presidential administrations and probably with all people of, a certain amount of wealth and power. But Robbie, what was your take on the latest sort of scandal with the Russians and Donald Trump? Because it does seem like every time you think it's sort of over and there's nothing to it, there's like another layer to it. So what was your take on it?
Well, I guess I had more of a meta take on it, if you don't mind me kind of going out and doing a take on some of the other takes that are out there, because
please do.
So one of the first thoughts that I had when I saw this was, okay, this is going to be another how I would describe as a litmus test for the American public, especially the American public who's more confined to the left side of the spectrum, to see how many of those people would think to themselves, aha, here's the proof that we've been looking for this whole time. Or also the other side of it are people on the left who have been holding out this whole time, waiting for some kind of evidence or proof that Trump really was colluding with Russia. And when you peel back the layers from that even more, in reality, just to answer part of your question more directly, is this part of, is this along the lines of shady dealings and back channel communications that is done in D.C.? Is this normal? I think that it is relatively normal. However, if this was in a vacuum by itself and this had come out as a scandalous election story, a few months later, I don't think that it would be having nearly the amount of impact it's having now. And that's because this merely builds on top of a narrative that's been building for the last 2 years that Russia is meddling with our election systems. Russia's been trying to hack our electrical grid. They've been trying to hack and cyber attack our infrastructure. And, they invaded Crimea. When I'm saying these things, I'm repeating sort of the mainstream talking points. I don't necessarily believe those things in those terms. But this has been building for at least 2 years. And once we got to the point where a lot of the American public started to believe or was willing to accept that sort of phony 17 intelligence agencies all agree that Russia manipulated our election. Once it got to that point, I think that this Don Jr. revelation merely only attaches to that narrative and seems like a huge deal, because if you really want to read between the lines, the narrative that they're trying to set up is that Russia hacked our election in favor of Donald Trump, and that somehow, in some form or another, Trump or members of his family have been colluding with Russia in terms of the election and may have either encouraged or somehow asked Russia to do that, meaning to leak Hillary Clinton's emails. Now, nobody's actually saying it in the terms that I've just laid out, but if you really read between the lines, that is really the narrative that they're trying to build, is that somehow Donald Trump Jr. May have actually, even though apparently he didn't get any information from this meeting, that somehow, this links back to the idea that the Russians hacked our election and that they were trying to work out some kind of back channel deal with the Trumps, to try to give them something to help them win the election. And even though people aren't saying that's what they were given, literally they're not saying that. That's sort of the implication. If you really want to chronologically, look back at this narrative, at least for the past 6 or 8 months.
No, definitely. And this, again, it does, as you say, it kind of fits into this narrative that's been unfolding. It has all of the hallmarks of what the mainstream media has been hawking to us. Now, what I kind of getting into a more meta discussion of this. What I find so interesting is that, especially with this particular story, the Don Jr. story, it fulfills everybody's wishes, because it totally plays into the, we'll see, of course, collusion, Russia, treason, which is, again, people bandying this word treason should really take a look and look up the definition, because, Donald Trump Jr. taking some meeting with, even with now these 8 people, that's not necessarily treason. It's not like he was selling secrets, but like nuclear codes or something like that to the Russians. Treason is really hard to prove, and it takes a lot more. But anyway, it fits into that narrative, that this is just sort of business as usual. It fits into the right-wing conspiracy culture narrative that, this is some sort of deep state plot, that this is George Soros, that this is his agent, even though there's 8 and 7 other people aside from Veselnitskaya. So are they all, agents of George Soros? Well, they're not going to answer that question. It fits into that. And then at the same time, it also kind of fits into the, well, this is just politics as usual, get over it. So it's one of these sort of amazing stories that is able to, it sort of serves everybody's purpose. And I find that's what's so interesting about this, is that it fits into everyone's narrative, when at the end of the day, when you kind of peel back, perhaps this really is a story about, as JP and I were talking in the first hour, of just a sort of, money laundering, corruption, dirty dealings. That this is just sort of almost as if all of these sort of conspiracy theories are just sort of smoke screens. And I find that's interesting in that we've now entered this time in media consumption or in culture where we're all just sort of getting what we want out of these stories and kind of throwing truth to the wind. And I don't know. I mean, Robbie, what do you make of that? In that, again, this this isn't the only example of this, but I think this is a great example where it works for everybody. It feeds both sides. Both sides are happy with the sort of status quo of this story. What do you make of that?
Well, it's very interesting that you brought up, especially the take that you brought up about the, again, our favorite, the deep state versus Trump narrative. It popped up again for this one, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit more in a little bit more detail. But it does seem like this does fulfill many people's narratives at the same time, and then when you pull back the layers from it, Donald Trump really didn't get anything out of it. He claims he didn't even know what the Magnitsky Act was. Yeah, I'm almost inclined to believe him, because look at what he did after this scandal erupted in the mainstream media. They didn't have any emails to show in these articles showing that he actually did have these communications. And apparently he thought by releasing them online, I think he released them on Twitter actually, as screenshots, that would somehow make him look good or make him look innocent, that he wasn't involved in this. But it actually did the opposite. There's literally a line in there saying that we have information. I don't have it in front of me, so I don't know exactly what it said, but it essentially said, we're willing to give you information about Hillary's campaign, or Hillary, that came from the Russian government. Like it literally says that in the email exchanges. So if he was releasing those thinking that it would, show people proof that he wasn't trying to do that, it's actually the exact opposite. His response was something like, love it. I love it. And then he forwarded it off to Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort. Manafort, who was already very strongly implicated as being, involved in this, whatever this scandal is at this point, Russiagate. So I just thought that was incredibly cartoonish. But one of the interesting things that deep state versus Trump narrative brings up is I think it brings up something very true that has absolutely nothing to do with that narrative, because I believe it's false. I think that obviously you know how I feel about this, that it's complete garbage to refer to the deep state as being Democrat operatives who are loyal to Obama and Hillary, who work from the inside of the intelligence community. That's a completely garbage narrative, and I'm really disappointed to see that narrative taking over what used to be the traditional narrative of what the deep state actually was. You mentioned Erik Prince earlier. That to me is more of an embodiment of deep state, of what the deep state is, than anything with this. But interestingly, the woman who, when I first saw a picture of her, I literally thought it was like Liz Wall.
It does look like Liz Wall's mother or something. Yeah,
who'd gained a bunch of weight or something. When I first saw the picture, I was like, wait, is this Liz Wall? I was confused. It's not Liz Wall. I actually, you said her name, you pronounced it better than I can, so I'm not going to attempt to.
Veselnitskaya?
Yes, her. The interesting thing about her that I think that deep state narrative brings up is that the Zero Hedge article I read trying to imply she was a deep state operative, and this was a deep state trap set to get Donald Trump ensnared into some kind of legal NSA wiretapping of Trump's whole campaign. The narrative being laid out is that by setting up this meeting, it was almost like a sting operation so that they can have FISA authorization to then wiretapped Donald Trump's entire campaign leading into the election. That's their narrative. However, the evidence that they present for solidifying this narrative, which I think is bullshit, is that this woman was actually constantly around Washington, D.C. in House sessions. She was not pro-Trump. She was critical of Putin openly. And at the same time, the mainstream media is trying to say she was a Russian intelligence asset, that somehow she was, working on behalf of the Kremlin. Now, I've seen an interesting reaction to that where people are like, well, both of these things might be true. However, if this was the case, then this is the most sloppy intelligence operation we've ever seen, which does kind of bring up an interesting kind of paradox here, that I think you're dealing with two completely opposing general narratives, that Russia is omnipotent, that Putin is omniscient, that he controls everything, that he does these calculated disruption intelligence activities to disrupt elections all over the world. And then this opposing narrative, which I believe is actually the true one, is that Russia is actually not that competent, and their intelligence agencies and their spy operations are probably not as competent as ours are. And in some cases, even the Russia Today television network was managed in an incompetent fashion. So I know that because I saw the inside of the Russia Today television network. So it is laughable to me when you get a lot of these narratives about Russia Today, about how it's some kind of Russian intelligence operation and how everybody gets orders from Putin. So it's like, it reminds me of those dueling narratives, and I know one of them has to be false, essentially.
No, well, again, I mean, this is like such sloppy spycraft. Again, I mean, it boggles the mind, like, why would the deep state pick her if it's so easy for some idiot that works for Mike Cernovich to just go on her Facebook and pull up a bunch of ostensibly random photos that don't prove anything, we talked in the first hour. I mean, her behind Michael Fall doesn't mean that she works for Michael McFall.
Exactly.
But anyway, that aside.
But it does mean that she was present in DC quite often before we crossed that threshold of calling everybody who's Russian a spy or an intelligence agent. So, for example, if she had met, or if Donald Trump Jr. had met with an RT reporter who told them we have dirt on the Hillary campaign that might have come from the Russian government, the media would be talking about it the exact same way. Even if there was zero evidence that this RT reporter, was an intelligence asset. So I don't know if my point was made clear, but sorry for interrupting you.
No, absolutely. And I think it's also important too to note that, again, as you said, that Russia is like, again, the way it's portrayed, it sort of fits into both sides. They're, as you say, they're all powerful, but they're seemingly fairly sloppy. And you were just sort of talking about the Russia, the spying apparatus and spy games and things like that. And I don't know if you saw this, Robbie, but there's there was back in December of 2016, so just after Trump is elected, but before the inauguration, Obama confiscated or basically took over these two facilities that were diplomatic facilities, but they were, Russian spy operations or headquarters or something. One was out in Long Island. The other one was in Maryland. And they also, the Obama administration seized the property and then expelled 35 Russian diplomats from the U.S. And Putin didn't really react to this. Now, the normal thing you do when a foreign government expels your spies is you expel a bunch of their spies. And this is sort of, tit for tat spycraft 101. But Putin didn't, because he was, I guess, going to wait and see what Trump would do. And just the other day, Sergei Lavrov and Dmitry Peskov, so the foreign minister and the main spokesperson for Putin, both spoke about the need to restore access to these two facilities that were seized by Obama. And this was just before a meeting between the Russian deputy foreign minister and the U.S. Undersecretary of State. And, and there's some sort of weird comments back and forth on this. There's some report in RIA Novosti, that cited some high-ranking White House official as saying they're not planning on giving anything up unless Russia gives something in return. Sebastian Gorka, who we talked about in the first hour, he told CNN that handing back the compounds was more or less dependent on Russia holding up its end of the bargain in Syria with the ceasefire. And
strange. Okay.
Yeah. Right. I mean, and he didn't come out and basically said, but he more or less alluded to that. And he talked about, well, if the things sort of go well with the ceasefire and this, then, perhaps the handing back of, facilities and stuff can happen and whatnot. And
isn't that what Michael Flynn got caught up in? Wasn't he trying to make some kind of deal with the ambassador?
Yes, I think there was something about that.
Yeah, I think it had to do with those facilities. Like
yes,
he was,
right.
Yeah, but I don't remember the details. But yeah, there's so many layers to this narrative. I mean, it's very hard to keep track.
No, and then this to me is interesting. Again, in the midst of this Donald Jr. scandal, and Putin and the Kremlin are in league with Donald Trump, and they're really all working for Russian intelligence. And then you see the reality of this, where things don't seem to be so peachy keen between the Russians and the Americans. And it's things like this, spy facilities. That's where the things are actually being, like the real fight is actually taking place. And I mean, Robbie, what do you make of this? I mean, first we have this fantastic story of Obama, and they must have known that these facilities exist. I mean, if you look at the pictures of, especially the one in Maryland, it is this gorgeous giant property, like right on the river. And the same, in the one in Long Island, is very luxurious sort of. I mean, maybe they really were recreational facilities. And of course, it's 35 Russian diplomats were expelled, but this is, presumably they were spies or worked for intelligence. But what do you make of this? Because this to me is fascinating in the background of this Donald Trump Jr. scandal. We have this going on, and just the other day too, again, the U.S. made further claims against a Russian disaster relief center in southern Serbia as being part of some sort of Russian intelligence operation. That's why it's near to Kosovo. It's near to NATO troops. It's some sort of possibly like maybe like an eavesdropping, they're collecting data or information, stuff like that. What do you make of this? Because this I find truly fascinating. And it's just sort of missed by everybody, mainstream and alternative. What do you make of this, Robbie?
Well, I mean, it was a fairly big story. I think it happened right before the election. So, it kind of got buried in the onslaught of election news. But I thought it was very strange when it happened, because if you really think about this, Obama, if he thought that those, let's put it on, on his lap for now, is that if he really thought that those diplomats were spies and they were operating spying operations, including the ambassador himself, which now everybody, all the neocons and neoliberal hawks call him a Russian spy, whereas during the entire Obama administration, he was called the Russian ambassador. He wasn't a spy. So it is very, very interesting that Obama literally did that right before the election. So one has to wonder, how long did the White House or, the CIA or different intelligence agencies here suspect this Russian outpost, or I believe these two different Russian outposts were actually intelligence operations, and why did they let them operate for so long? That to me is the most crucial part of this. Similar to if Obama really thought Russia was hacking the election and was already releasing the WikiLeaks or leaking that stuff to WikiLeaks, why did they, not do anything publicly? Or Obama claims that he picked up the red phone and called Putin, one night and said, cut it out. We know what you guys are doing. So none of it really makes sense. The narratives do not meld together, I don't think. And also similarly, why, and I'm not saying we should shut down Russia today, but you have to wonder, why is the U.S. State Department or the U.S. government in general allowing Russia today to operate and broadcast on television airwaves and radio airwaves in the United States if they believe, and they say they do, according to their own reports, if they believe that Russia today is an intelligence operation. So it does raise some very strange questions like, let's say that, one possibility is that Obama wanted to sort of open things up and just, the free exchange of ideas. We're a free country. We allow free speech. Let's see how far that can go and allow these, these things to happen, Russia to put out these narratives here. Or you could also see it as a method to smoke out if the U.S. government and aspects of it really did believe all of these ambassadors or Russian employees working at these outposts were spies. Were they waiting for them to sort of blow their cover or just take, overstep in their operations in order to smoke them out? Were they sort of giving them, just sort of a wait and see mentality? Those are two different possibilities, but at the same time, and then I guess there's a third possibility, which I lean towards, is that the U.S. government, for some reason or another, and I can't say exactly why, decided very late into Obama's term that we are going to outright call out a bunch of different Russians and different Russian businesses or people as spies or working for a Russian intelligence operation as possibly as some kind of aggressive psyop towards Russia, a way to raise the stakes right before Trump got into office. And I'm not saying they did it to, sort of force Trump into being aggressive towards Russia, but it was definitely, I think, done as a last-ditch effort to raise the stakes, to make it harder to lower the stakes. And I think that's pretty obvious.
Oh, and that is very much the belief of, many people, and not just the sort of like conspiracy culture people, but even, some of like the kind of some of the more ludicrous Fox News personalities and stuff that think that, Putin is fine and Trump and Putin are best friends and this is all good, that this was sort of done by Obama at the last minute in order to sort of, strain relationships between the two. Which I actually, I find interesting, because perhaps it is true. And that seems like that's what it is on the surface. Because again, as you say, how long did they know about this? Dismissing 35 diplomats and their families, and presumably seizing whatever their homes or I don't know what happened.
And not arresting them. They just kicked them out, right?
Yeah, they just kicked them out. That's not like you don't just wake up one day and say, hey, let's do that. This is like a whole process to this too. I assume, I don't know for sure, but I assume, it's not just like you get a letter in the mail. Maybe you do, but I think it's like you're given a certain amount of time. You've got 72 hours to vacate the country and go back there. Presumably some of these people are, they're sort of outing them as spies. Can they ever work again? It's a huge thing to do. Plus you're taking over these two compounds. Again, that's not like, you just put an eviction notice, and nail it into the wall. You're going in there probably with armed guards or some, I don't know, CIA agents or something saying, we're taking this over. If you're in those facilities, you're probably burning paper and documents and stuff. It's a huge operation. And it's funny that, despite all of the rhetoric about Putin and Trump being so buddy-buddy, it seems as if those facilities are not going to be handed back. Now, maybe that's finally someone around Trump telling him, listen, the optics of this are going to be horrible. Because as much as they might, want to embrace Russia, nobody it doesn't matter where you are, where you're from, whatever country, when you've got spies, foreign spies operating, you can't be like in favor, no one is like pro-Russian intelligence, as like part of their campaign platform.
Not even the most hardcore Trump supporter would probably.
Exactly. It's going to be like, no, we should give back these SVR or FSB facilities back to the Russians so they can do whatever the hell they were doing there. So maybe he is sort of in a bind. And, again, too, Russia is planning to expel 30 American diplomats in a few weeks if this doesn't happen. And they've stated that publicly. Putin said he will do this if this doesn't, if these facilities are not handed back. That's going to be a huge deal too, because essentially Putin or, the Russian government is saying these people are spies and who knows what facilities they might take over. And I don't know, it just sort of throws this whole, question of collusion and all of these things kind of up in the air, or at least it throws a, bit of a monkey wrench into it, when you're talking about, okay, now, corrupt Russian businessmen and Donald Trump, that's a given. Now, maybe even some of them, connected to Putin, that's a given. But when you're talking about, organizations like the CIA and the, FSB, SVR, GRU in Russia and other things, and embassies and ambassadors who basically do work for the CIA and they just do, CIA station chiefs are in embassies. That's a whole different can of worms here that does seem to be kind of unraveling. And I don't know. I wonder, and then you see these bizarre comments by Sebastian Gorka alluding to, well, we'll give them back as long as Russia, I guess, makes sure Assad doesn't break the ceasefire. I guess I just sort of wonder, what is the next step with that? And does this sort of, escalate into a more serious manner? Because again, 30 American diplomats being sent home, being outed as spies, that's a pretty huge, I don't know. How does Donald Trump deal with that, Robbie?
Well, I think you've hit on something extremely important here, because in all the storm and the noise of the election, it's honestly hard to remember this incident very clearly, because like I said, it happened right before the election. A lot of things overshadowed it, but I think that this probably is one of the most important events before the election, and it would be worthwhile to see if anybody did a really in-depth investigative report about it. How did the U.S. government shut down those outposts? Did they go in with a SWAT team armed? Did they make them leave that day without any warning? How was it done with sort of a strong arm of the national security state, or was it done in a more sort of diplomatic fashion?
Oh, sorry, we lost you there for a second, Robbie, but we are back now. You were just talking about the gravity of the situation in terms of the dismissal or the expulsion of these 35 diplomats. Was this done, with in a friendly way? Was this done in a more aggressive way? And just talking about the seriousness of an action like this. So, kind of pick up where you were left off there.
Well, yeah, I didn't really think a whole lot about that incident, and probably just because it got buried in the news cycle, after the election. It happened right before the election. But when you go back to that event, I think that it would be really worthwhile to see if anybody's done an in-depth investigative report or a piece about what happened there, because, it makes a huge difference depending on how they did that. Did they give these diplomats any warning whatsoever for them and their families to leave the country? Did they go in with armed guards or a SWAT team? Did the FBI go kicking down the door of these places and round them up? None of them were arrested, which is quite odd, actually. If they were spies, there's so many contradictions involved in this. Let's take the U.S. government's word at face value that these people were somehow spies. If they were operating an intelligence operation from in there, that's what that means. So why weren't they arrested? Why weren't they interrogated? they were just kicked out. It's kind of reminiscent of the Israeli art students fiasco that happened after 9/11, where hundreds of suspected Israeli spies were rounded up and then just shipped out of the country with hardly even a slap on the wrist. None of them were actually arrested. So I'm not sure, what kind of impact that actually had. But if I were to take a guess, I would say that the expelling those 35 diplomats was a huge fuck you to Russia and was probably made them extremely angry. And it was one of the only things I think the U.S. government did in sort of that late hour of the Obama administration that was a direct sort of, counterattack is the wrong word, but that's what the U.S. government, would say. I think that it was one of the only incidents like that I can think of, besides Obama, saying he picked up the red phone and called Putin and told him to cut it out with the hacking, which is kind of an absurd, unbelievable story also.
No, and I just pulled up the article where I first heard about it, which was on intelnews.org, which is an invaluable news outlet for things like this, for espionage, spying. They cover really great story, and they cover stories like this where that get very little coverage. Perhaps outside of a small blurb or just a small, two lines or of something in a much larger article. And I guess on the whole issue of interrogating spies and things, I think this is sort of like this is par for the course. This is sort of how these things are done. It's funny, the spies exist in order to coerce people, to manipulate people, to kill people. But when it comes to, and this is illegal in all senses of the, there's nothing legal about being a spy. There is no James Bond license to kill. They're there, doing illegal things. Yet when a government finds out about it, of course there can be actions where they're kidnapped or murdered. But in this there's this very formal expulsion where it's just sort of, that's what happens. We expel 35 spies, then the Russians will expel 35 spies. And it's never questioned, and it's almost like this old school, old boys club gentleman's agreement that this is just how it's done. We won't really, ask any questions. And I'm looking back on this article in Intel News, this is back in December, when this happened. And they actually were talking about that it's believed that the current size of Russia's human intelligence presence in the United States is estimated at more than 100 officers. So expelling 35, that's like a third of them gone. So that is fairly serious. Although obviously they'll all be replaced. I'm sure they've already been replaced at this point. So it's not going to make too much of a difference. But I think it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier. Seemingly, though, those sorts of the questions over these two facilities. Just the mere question of, is Russia about to expel 35 of our spies? And then how do you deal with that moving forward? And again, I think that this is something that we should be paying more attention to, because it sort of goes against the grain of everything that we're being told, both by the, all strands of the media. Because again, it's one of these things of like, what is Trump, is he going to get pissed off? Is he gonna, how does a President Trump react to Vladimir Putin expelling 35 of our diplomats, who of course he's never going to say that they were working for the CIA. So that, I think, just watching to see how that unfolds will be interesting. But, it's funny, Robbie, and we've talked about this before. We talked about this mythical 100 days in office, and whatnot, but I think this business over spies and these facilities and stuff, I think this is a much more important test for the Trump presidency than people really fathom. Now, the scandals and those things, those are a test, but more so towards the viability and of the almost of like the Trump family. You know what I mean? It's not even necessarily the administration, but the family and the cronies and things. But this is a real test of how does a president act? Because this is something that he's never had to deal with, and this is one of those instances where him running his mouth on Twitter is not going to help anything. Especially when they're expelling spies, and this of course brings up the another one of these figures that's almost invisible in this whole conversation, and that's the director of the CIA, Mike Pompeo, who's almost like non-existent as an administration figure. And again, we have to wonder, how is he going to react to this? And there's a marked difference between, you have like a Leon Panetta, who would have obviously been going on and on about the Russians and if they were to expel our diplomats and things and seize, and again, the Russians are saying they're going to seize properties too. So I mean, can you imagine that too? How they react to that? But I mean, Rob, what do you make of the Mike Pompeo's sort of silence? Because he's another, he's an extremely powerful figure, who, in the Trump presidency, and again, the way that it operates, where it's, basically, you kind of wonder who's running the asylum. But, what do you make of Mike Pompeo and his sort of silence, his sort of, that he's almost like this figure that you forget exists?
Well, it's strange. I mean, we know that Nikki Haley, for example, has been very aggressive towards Russia. I think I mentioned that earlier. General James Mattis has said that Russia is the number one threat. He said that going into the office. So, yeah, we haven't really heard from Pompeo yet what he thinks about Russia. And I don't want to fuel any of this deep state versus Trump or Obama loyalist holdovers versus Trump narrative. But in some form or another, I think this was set up for the future administration to put them in a bind where to actually reinstate those diplomats would be politically impossible. And I think that was part of the purpose. They knew a future administration would never be able to roll that back. And it did put Donald Trump in a bind, perhaps, but that doesn't mean that he still can't be, making sure the messaging on Russia from his administration is consistent and makes sense, which he's not doing at all. So it's, I don't think that I'm not saying that that's an excuse for Donald Trump not actually having a détente with Russia, but I think that it was designed to raise the stakes, absolutely, to raise the stakes in this information war. And in this, it's not a literal Cold War, but in this new Cold War with Russia paradigm. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, again, too, the raising of the stakes is very important to know, because we have no idea how he's going to react. And I can't, I'm not going to put money down saying that it's going to be a calm, measured response, especially if spies are being expelled and CIA facilities are being taken over by the Russian government in Moscow or St. Petersburg. But there's also just this infighting. How does this trickle out in terms of, like, you were just mentioning Nikki Haley, who seems to, be kind of running like the UN separately from the White House. Trump will say one thing and then Nikki Haley will say the complete opposite. And there seems to be no sort of like, there obviously, if you watch like the State Department briefings and things, questions will be asked of the State Department spokespeople, well, why is Nikki Haley saying this? And they'll come up with these sort of wishy-washy responses. But you have to give credit to Obama in this move, this chess move, because I can see this really trickling out into becoming a huge issue. Because what if Nikki Haley is just like, starts pontificating at the Security Council about this? But like we were just saying, Trump is in this bind. Obviously, he's going to want to, I think he probably would want to reinstate them or sort of smooth things over and, maintain whatever little semblance of support he may have built up between himself and the Russians. But, like we were saying earlier, this is not, no one runs on a campaign promise of like being pro-Russian spy. It just doesn't happen. There's like no way that you can justify that. And again, too, I mean, the people should really be terrified by the fact that we've rarely seen Mike Pompeo speaking we have no idea what he's doing, which runs counter to the past 16 years at least of CIA directors that were fairly visible. We have no idea what this guy is up to, what he's doing. And, this is sort of classic old school, MI6 spy master, where MI6 was denying that they existed while they had this enormous building, in the middle of London. So, we should be terrified of that. But, switching gears a little bit, cause I do want to get your take on this and talk a little bit about, a part 4 of a very heavy agenda. What is going on with the neocons and all of this? Because they seem to have kind of, quieted down a little bit. There was this sort of brief moment where maybe they were kind of making headway with the Trump administration certainly I think on things like Iran. We just saw, the Trump signing off on the nuclear deal, but adding sanctions on it. So I guess, and that was interpreted on Fox News as, they're breaking the deal, even though Trump signed off on the deal, meaning that they're following it. So where do the neocons fit into all of this at the moment?
Well, it's good timing that you asked me this now, actually, because the Foreign Policy Initiative just announced it's closing its doors.
Really?
And yeah. And they didn't officially announce it on their website. If you go to their website now, it still seems quite active. I'm still getting their weekly briefs,
Good.
which for anybody who wants to follow the military-industrial complex and geopolitics from a neocon perspective, I highly recommend subscribing to their daily briefs, because you can really get you can really figure out what the pulse is of this mindset in DC and how much stuff that they're actually looking at once. China, Japan, North Korea, Iran, South America. I mean, it's all there in every, nightly, daily brief. But interestingly, Rosie Gray, Eli Lake's girlfriend.
Yes.
And I'm actually not sure if she is his current girlfriend or if they are not together anymore. I'm assuming they're still together because she got the scoop of Foreign Policy announcing its closure. And it was filled with anonymous quotes, which I thought was very amusing. And of course, the article appeared on, it didn't appear on BuzzFeed. I think it was actually on either Washington Post or another outlet. I can't remember.
I think it's The Atlantic.
That's what it was. Yeah, The Atlantic. So interestingly, it's filled with anonymous quotes. Some of them are probably from Jamie Kirchick. Some of them seem like they're from Bill Kristol or other people at the Foreign Policy Initiative. And one of the things that I pulled from the article that stood out to me the most was she says that the founders who opened the Foreign Policy Initiative are somewhat split on the idea of should we work with Trump or not. And she doesn't say who is more leaning towards working with Trump and who isn't, but I think one could guess that based on Bill Kristol and Robert Kagan's statements still about Trump, it's neither one of them. So I think that only really leaves Eric Edelman and Dan Senor, which actually that to me makes sense that those two would be a little bit more open to working with Trump. They're not as much sort of bloviating editorialists. They're a little bit more, I think, calculated strategists, especially Eric Edelman, who served under Dick Cheney in the Bush administration. He was directly involved in cooking up the Iraq war propaganda. So that to me was very fascinating that, we're only, 6 months into the Trump administration, and this think tank sort of coyly announces via, Rosie Gray that they're closing. But to me, that really only means one thing, is that just like when PNAC closed down and reopened as the Foreign Policy Initiative, we now have to be paying very close attention to see what they're going to reopen as next. Yeah. Because the military-industrial complex always finds a way. The neocons and the liberal interventionists in this country have always been the best salesmen for the military-industrial complex, especially the neocons. So it would be foolish and naive to think that this is the end of that neocon lineage somehow, that Trump just crushed it. A lot of people do seem to think that. But Glenn Greenwald, surprisingly, wrote a really extensive article about where the neocons are going now. And in this article for The Intercept, he talks about the Alliance for Securing Democracy. It's a new think tank that's opening up, and it's headed by Laura Rosenberger, who served as the foreign policy advisor for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign, and Jamie Fly, who is the director of the Foreign Policy Initiative. So here we have a direct union being made between Hillary's campaign and the head of the Foreign Policy Initiative, the PR head of it. To me, that's pretty huge, but completely expected at the same time. This is not surprising. The CNAS already wrote a report that had contributions from Julianne Slaught, Robert Kagan, Eric Edelman, tons of neoliberals and PNAC neocons writing it together. That was essentially what that Hillary Clinton event that I went to was all about. That was mostly those people who organized that. But yeah, this is where they're at now. Is they're moving into the neoliberal, more liberal interventionist sector of DC. But I'm actually wondering if they're going to make a more openly hawkish, more maybe nakedly right-wing neocon think tank in the Trump era again, like they had under the Bush era. I would not be surprised if they alternately opened up something like that at the same time. So
no, I think that was my thought when you were talking there, was that perhaps they feel as if they tried with Hillary Clinton. They desperately tried to help her get elected. They tried softening their stance and into this more democracy and I mean, they don't use the term nation building anymore. That's become like a 4-letter word in DC think tank circles, but much more of that sort of the liberal interventionist arm. But I mean, I wonder if they're not just going to go kind of full balls to the wall, old school, the like Bush era neocon, where it's really just essentially about, destroying the world and recreating it in our image. And that kind of reminds me again, we were talking in the first hour with JP Sottile about this whole concept of privatizing the war in Afghanistan, using groups like DynCorp and Blackwater to basically run that. And that seems, much more kind of along the old school lines of the neoconservatives. And maybe that's the way that they kind of get back into power, too, is sort of appealing to Trump's more insane right-wing rhetoric. But
I agree with you. I think that's – I think that if they were smart, they will figure out a way how to tap into that, because they're up against a phony, mostly phony anti-interventionist why are we wasting all this money and meddling in all these different countries mentality among the right-wing Trump base. So they have to quash that first. But I don't think it'll be very hard to quash it all because, as I said, I think it's extremely phony. It has no moral underpinning whatsoever. It is not an anti-war mindset for moral reasons. It's for selfish economic nationalist reasons. And I think that'll be fairly easy to quash, especially if Trump does something that is perceived as some kind of boon for the economy. And we have
Well, Robbie, we're coming up right here at the end. So quickly, where can people go to hear more of your work? And we'll be talking to you very soon, I think.
Well, I do a podcast with my sister Abby Martin, Media Roots Radio. We're trying to do it once a week right now. We're getting there. You can check it out at MediaRoots.org. It's on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher. And if you want to check out my film series, A Very Heavy Agenda, you can check that out at averyheavyagenda.com on DVD or video on demand. And part 4 of A Very Heavy Agenda is going to be coming out very soon. And there's already a trailer up for it on YouTube.
News and information you can trust. This is American Freedom Radio. Freedom, American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me. American Freedom Radio, Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys because they have all the technology. They have all these great things that they're going to do, but obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
Nutritious food is real body armor. It builds muscle, burns fat, improves digestion, and feeds the entire body the nutrients it needs. Did you know the U.S. government banned the hemp plant from growing in the United States and classified it as a Schedule I drug to hide it behind the marijuana plant? People have been confused about this plant for over 80 years, and many still don't know what hemp is. So now you know hemp is not marijuana, and marijuana is not hemp. They are different varieties of the same species. HempUSA.org wants the world to know these basic facts and to help people understand that hemp protein powder is the best-kept health secret you need to know about. Remember, hemp protein powder contains 53% protein, is gluten-free, anti-inflammatory, non-GMO, and is loaded with nutrients. Call 888-910-4367, 888-910-4367, and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org.
No rules, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, We are American Freedom Radio.